All right, well, welcome back to week 2 of Book Club with Blessed Are the Spiraling. We are here to talk about chapters 3 through 5 today. But again, I remind you, if you are behind on your reading, don't go anywhere. It's okay, because we're going to talk about a lot, and there's going to be plenty for you to still discuss, because the priority is that you're getting these truths in your heart so that you can live it out and come out of a spiraling season the way that God would intend you to.
Yes.
So we're so glad to have you back. And today, I think, Sam, you were a little salty that you didn't talk as much last week, so I figured.
No, okay, I just have this question. You tore me up with a quote. Immediately in chapter, can we just hop in?
Do it.
Let's go.
No appetizers, nothing.
Yeah,
no,
let's go.
We know why we're here.
Steak.
We know why we're here.
Straight to the
you
entree.
came to eat.
Straight to the entree.
Eat,
Let's do it.
period. We're
Let's
going to
go.
feed. Page 35, you said this quote that really tore me up, okay? And you said, because the God who does all things well has a plan not just for our days of dominion. I'm so sorry. What is this word? Domination?
Domination. Days of domination.
Days of domination.
Uh-huh.
I'm telling you, I'm learning by reading your book of domination, but also for our days of diminished capacity.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. You know, I come with the young adult skew, and a lot of young adults in our ministry and in our culture right now are on our grind, right? We're trying to succeed. We're trying to level up. But this was such a great perspective for me of diminished capacity. I wanted to ask you how you accept diminishment without spiraling into disappointment. Like, what does that look like? What does that balance look like for you?
Our culture does nothing, and sadly, sometimes the church too, to give us a framework for how to process the seasons of life.
Right.
Right. We literally, I think it went bankrupt, but had a store that reached the zenith of popularity, and it was everywhere, called Forever 21.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
We just
What
went out of
is,
business.
right?
Yes.
But what is that if not that idea that's not an idol in our culture of we worship at the altar of youth?
Yes. 100%.
Forever 21. Like,
Yeah.
but FYI, you're 21, lasts 365 days. Like, that's all you get. There's no such thing.
Yeah, there's
so true.
I don't care what Botox.
Yeah.
I don't care what like how you're going to be about that kale juice, smoothie.
kale juice,
Like,
yep.
right, you're going to die with a bad taste in your mouth, but you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
So to process that, and then to not be terrified of it, because the Bible does give us a framework for old age.
Yeah.
And the Bible says the glory of a young man is his strength. A young woman is his strength. So there's no shame in, man, but young adult, like roar.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Eye of the
Yeah.
tiger. Come on, somebody. Like, go for it.
Right.
Use that strength and be about that hustling and grinding
Right.
for God's glory, not for your identity.
Yeah.
Right? The world needs that next Walmart or the next Chick-fil-A
Yeah.
or
Right.
the
Yes,
next Star
amen.
Wars, right? Or
Yeah,
Beethoven's Fifth. So
Right.
like the innovators, the Nobel Prize winners, the ones who tend to get Pulitzers, like these things tend to happen young.
Yeah,
So
right.
be about that while it's there. Your mind is
Yes.
going full speed, all of those things. But also don't be terrified of the next season and the next season,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
verse also says that the glory of an old man is his gray hair.
Yes.
Okay? But what does culture do? The second gray show up. We
Yep.
pluck them or we dye them.
Yes.
That's
Right?
100%.
We try, and there's nothing wrong if you feel that you want to be about that. But the point is, don't live in fear of the next season, because Scripture says there is a glory in both.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that means you don't have to hang on to one thinking there's no glory over
Wow.
there.
Yeah.
But we all tend to think, well, I got to hang on to my daughter kindergarten because there's not glory. No, there's a glory
Right.
for her second grade.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
glory for her when she's 20. There's a glory
Wow.
for when you go to be with Jesus. I know that's scary to think
Yes.
about, but God's already in your future and He's got it under
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
Wow.
You talk about this. I don't know if it's in this chapter, but it's in my brain. You talk about that scripture and how it's almost jumping the curb.
Yes.
Is the language you use? How do you do that? How do you transition from old to young? I'm turning 30 this year.
Yeah.
Woo! It's scary. And I feel like this is my jumping the curb era. Like, how am I going from being this like young spry to now the wisdom? Like,
Yeah.
what's that transition look like?
Well, first of all, you are not turning old.
Okay,
So
period.
just for the record.
Okay, we can end the week.
Yeah. So, I know we have that in our mind. These like, oh, this is old. Like, you're very much still in the prime of life and
Yeah.
have so much more to go. But I think to let the terror out of what's next
Right.
is important.
Yes.
We
Wow.
build these things up like, after this, it's, all over. That's why we talk about when the spiraling for me came when I turned 38. Worldwide life expectancy is 72. Okay. So,
Wow.
if we think about it that way, then 18 is quarter of the way through. 36 is halfway through
Right.
globally. Now, people die older, people die younger. People live in triple digits.
Yeah.
And people, I think Val Kilmer recently just died at 68. So my dad died at 72 though. So I hit 38
Wow.
and I start thinking like, okay, I'm not young anymore.
Right.
I got ordained in my early 20s, started our church at 22, wrote my first book at 30. So my first 20 years of ministry, I was always, the young pastor. Every pastor, like, the young pastor.
Your identity was
And
that.
so a lot of that got tampered with when I realized I'm not old yet, but I'm not young anymore.
Yes.
Well, who am I? And if I'm not what I was, if what makes me has been taken from me, who am I?
Oof.
So I think that's just
Right.
a reality check on what are we using as our framework to build
my
identity.
goodness.
So this is the tension that I live with. And I gotta admit, you got me on chapter 3. You got me bad. And just as a disclaimer, as you guys read the book, anytime Pastor Levi asks a question in the book,
Yes.
he is about to get you.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
going to tear you up for
Yes.
real.
So just know that.
You were speaking my language at the beginning of the chapter because I'm an Enneagram 3. So I'm like, go, go, go. And you talked about you
Human
had
doing,
this,
not human being. Yeah.
yeah.
That's correct.
and you were talking about how like you started this season of spiraling at 38. Well, I don't know if this is dramatic of me, but I'll just be real. I had some of these questions at 28.
Yeah.
And that was a couple years ago because I was about to hit, I was like, oh my God, I'm getting closer to 30. I'm like, what is, like, I haven't done anything. It feels
Yeah.
like, right? And so you start this chapter, and this is where you got me because you talked about here, Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to
Yes.
do it with your
Yeah.
might.
And you were
Growth-
like frothing over with excitement about that.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
that's
then
That's what I've been doing all day.
growth and excellence should be your goal.
all
And then here it comes. But what about? And there's like, oh, he's getting me. He got
Yeah.
me. And my question for you, the tension that I live in, is this tension of contentment versus complacency.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How have you been able to be content with whether it's a skill set, whether it's an opportunity, whether it's a responsibility that God has given you,
Yeah.
while at the same time not staying complacent, not knowing like, oh, is
Yeah.
there more? I always
That's
struggle
excellent.
with that in my life.
Yeah.
How have you
Yeah.
navigated that?
Well, Covey says, to use Covey's language, that's a tension to manage, not a problem to solve. So we're not ever going to solve
Interesting.
that problem.
Yeah.
And knowing the difference between the two
Yeah.
is important, right? I need oil in my car. That's a problem to solve.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Figuring out the balance between a safe vehicle and a car I can afford.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a tension
Sure.
to manage. Okay,
Sure.
so what you're describing is not like we're not going to get a solution to it. And I'm an ENTJ, Enneagram 3, always on to the next thing. Victory never feels like what I thought it was going to feel
Right,
like.
right.
I'm
Yeah,
always like, this
wow.
didn't feel like what I did what
Right.
I was going to do. And I'm always wanting
alone.
more. I'm never satisfied
I
myself
feel-
or anybody
Wow.
else.
I feel so seen
Wow.
right now.
There you go.
Yes.
She's so good.
Yes.
And every Mary out there is like, what's wrong with you, Martha? Because we're the ones that are like, this
right.
banquet needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
Jesus, make my sister help me. It's like
Right.
kind of buried the lead here.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to make sure ambition doesn't become an evil word in our minds, because
Yes.
Paul said, "I'm chasing for gold. I don't want silver."
Right. Right.
Right. So that's not bad. Jesus said, if you don't bring a return on investment, he's going to call you a foolish servant.
Yeah.
So stewardship is important.
Because that's been demonized sometimes, I feel like.
Without
Ambition.
a doubt.
Yes.
Without a
Yeah,
doubt.
yeah.
Like the disciples go, Jesus, we want to be the greatest in your kingdom. Jesus
Yeah.
didn't chastise them for wanting to be the greatest,
Right.
He chastised them for wanting to be greater than each other. We should all seek
Interesting.
individually.
Yeah.
No, that is an incredible distinction.
I think
Yeah.
greatness is a quest that all of us should pursue.
Right.
Yeah.
Greatness in the greatest version of us we can be.
Wow.
That's
But not
wonderful.
benchmarking it
Yeah.
by each other.
That's wonderful.
You know what that reminds me of? This is not in these chapters that we're talking about right now, but in a couple of chapters before this, like what we talked about last week, this blew my mind when you pointed this out. I've read the Gospels several times. I'm not flexing. I'm just saying, like, I've read them, but I had never
read the
known.
Bible-
Yeah,
read the Bible
I've
several
read.
times.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, you talked about how Jesus fed the 5,000 first, and then after he had fed the 5,000, he fed 4,000.
Yes.
And
Yes.
It never sat quite right with me.
I was like,
As a
Have
three.
you heard of 6,000?
yes,
It's like there needs to be.
yes.
What about 5?
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about 6?
for
And
sure.
it's a recorded miracle. Like,
Yeah.
like it was important enough to still put in that
Yeah.
order that
Yes.
that's how this happened, and that
Right.
was still something that is in our Bible that we read about, but the order of it is what got me when we're talking about this whole, because you would be like, oh man, he's going downhill. Like he's diminishing. He's like, why is it not even better? Why is it not more people? You know, as if 4,000 people being fed is not miraculous. But for some reason that really, like when you say ate me up, that ate me up.
It really did.
I think I would have had a hard time with that if I was to decide, like, let's go into the next town, let's get some more people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like let's feed some more, because we need to keep it up and to the right.
Yeah.
But if we all go forward in our mind's eye to the day we can't do our job at peak performance anymore, and the day that we feel like maybe I can't do this at all. And that has to come. Like I'm going to be on a walker with tennis balls one day. Maybe Elon Musk will have made me one that flies. I don't know. But we just can't continue. And so if we can just believe that God has a plan for that, and something can be glorious because it's what he wants, not just because it's bigger.
Yeah.
And I think we have to embrace that.
Wow. I
Very
mean,
good.
okay, you're talking about embracing that, and we're talking about like what Jesus did and then like what he did after that.
Yes.
And it brings me a little bit to this thought that you have. It's on page 49. And you're talking about the wisdom of being present. Okay, that's like the title that you have here. But it's so interesting because we're talking about a little bit of like how do you, because before you were talking a little bit about planning, right? The concept of preparing and getting your mind of like where you're going, right? But then also being present and where you're at. My question, I guess, is like, how do I do both? What does that look like balancing that?
I mean, if we keep the Mary Martha paradigm active, I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and, right?
Yeah.
What if we sit at Jesus' feet, present in the moment, and then rise fueled by that to do what God has us to do?
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Right.
whether it's something grand and glorious and continuing on and whatever, and whether it's not, like just saying, you're the master, I'm the servant, you do all things well, right? The problem is when we do things for God, not powered by time spent with God, we start to act like we're God.
Yes.
Which is where Martha ended up. She literally bosses Jesus around.
Right.
So I think it's just an important reality check for us that like
crazy.
God wants us to steward our lives well
Right.
and maximize and all of those things without being defined by them.
Oh my goodness.
Speaking of stewarding, something I've noticed, not just in this chapter, but throughout the book, you'll see there seems to be this pattern of questions that you ask yourself, questions that you're asking throughout. I love here in page 49, page 55, you talked a little bit about this. You start asking all these questions instead of despair over what you can't do. Ask this question, what can I do?
Yes.
How have you, is that like a strategy that you've employed, asking a better question during some of those spells? I see kind of like this theme throughout the book that you kind of start off with one question and it leads you to a better question. How has that been in some of those spiraling seasons?
Yeah, I think it's jujitsu. It's using the enemy's force against him a little bit.
Yeah.
I think when I'm asking questions about my worth or about, you know, my importance or any of those things that tend to lead to nothing good, right?
Yeah.
Instead, what does God want me to do? Where is he? Where is he now? How can I move into this? Where's God here? So like, for example, if I'm stressing about whatever, that is just me, like an empty toxic loop that I get into.
Yes.
Oh, my best day is behind me, you know.
Yeah.
Have I peaked? Am I yesterday's news or whatever it might be? Those aren't obviously from the Spirit, so those have to be from the enemy because they don't lead to peace. But so instead, it's like, well, who can I encourage? What agencies do I still have? Who can I send a text? Who can I open a door for? Like, and all of a
Better
sudden,
questions.
we're asking better questions,
Yeah.
and thus brought to a better place.
I mean, you know what our eagers need to do?
Okay.
Our eagers need
Tell 'em.
to
Ask
evaluate.
Love week.
Okay, so yeah.
Talk about it.
Right. You get it.
Yeah, no, but really, like, what would it look like for us? Because you genuinely, one of the things that blessed us, and we talked about this, like the questions that you pose
Yes.
open our minds up to different opportunities.
Yes.
So, like, what questions are you asking yourself, and how can you take these questions and make them better? I just think that would be a great exercise.
Yeah, one day I said, God, I feel like I can't remember last time I shared my faith with somebody. It's so embarrassing as a pastor.
Wow.
I share the gospel on stage all the time. When was if I
Yeah.
just told the gospel to someone one-on-one?
Wow.
So Lord, would you help me? And then that day I missed a flight. And I got in the Uber sulking. I had to spend the night. I didn't want to be there. I was so irritated.
So annoying, yeah.
And then the Uber driver said, what brings you to town? I was like, I missed a flight. He goes, oh, I just moved here from Pakistan. I'm Islamic. My wife just died. Like, and just starts just telling me all this stuff.
Crazy.
And I'm like, well, as it turns out, so like, I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
like God made me miss a flight, but I'm saying
Sure.
like in that moment when I asked like, what's going on? And I felt so good after I got to talk about my daughter going to heaven and God
Yeah.
giving us strength, and I ended up getting his number. And like next time I was in town,
wild.
he became my driver. Like we're like,
No way.
and he adopted me. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone's like, oh, and he's right here. He's coming on set now. Come on, Daddy. No, I call him Daddy now. No, but how much my perspective shifted just by seeing someone else, not just
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, I have one question I have to ask before we wrap, because you talk about kind of like this pattern. This is like when you start talking about patterns. If you're following along in the book, it starts on page 60, and you kind of talk about how your pattern, or 62, you talk about how your pattern kind of evolves into, at one point you're burning through mentors.
Yeah.
And I feel like that this is kind of an epidemic for young adults that I've seen in my own life, where if I feel like I am no longer receiving from someone the thing I want to receive, I now hop on to the next thing or the next person. I wanted to ask you, like, you obviously figure out this pattern in your life. Like, one, how do you identify that pattern, and how do you choose to be different? Because even a few pages later, you talk about how it was an intentional choice. I can choose a different course instead of letting it pull me somewhere destructive.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to sit down long enough to understand where the pattern began and then how it's playing out.
Wow.
Only then can you really know how to deal with it. Because the
Yeah.
enemy for sure is looking how to deal with it. Right? Like
Exactly.
when I play Super Mario Brothers 1, even
game.
20 years later, I remember the sequence of mushroom, turtle. And so I can overcome the level because I know the
Yeah.
pattern.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of times we're oblivious to the patterns of our own life.
Oh my
You ate.
goodness.
And so we have to zoom out enough to see the pattern like
Yeah.
the enemy does so that
Wow.
we can exploit those for good and not for evil.
Yeah.
And so I still feel those same inclinations to
Yeah.
shield up and push away when I feel like someone's going to hurt me
Yep.
because I know where that came from. I know why I do that. And,
Yeah.
and I can choose to override the impulse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is incredible, because one of the things, that we were talking about is like how in this chapter you lay out how there's always a connection.
Yes.
Like there's always a connection, and like just acknowledging the title of this, we were kind of laughing about it, where it's like, I replaced my mom with pornography. And like for me, like how you break this down is so helpful, but what you're helping us see is that everything is connected to something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, there was a quote. Is this where that quote was about that I went crazy about? Hold on, where is it? If I can find it.
Let me see if I can find
It might be later in the book, but you at some point draw a connection of like how if you don't deal with something now, then you'll have to deal with it at a greater scale
Yes.
later in life. And
Yes.
so for those of us that are like, okay, like we have some, how did you go about identifying that? Because you talked about zooming out. So very practically speaking, can you give us a way that you've been able to dial in and do that? Something that people can leave group today and go try to implement into their life.
Well, the big framework I give is to really just sit down and chart out your top traumatic events of your life. When are the big shifting moments? Because oftentimes those connect to other things. So I didn't ever realize that the same period of time my mom essentially wasn't available to me in the same way she was
Yeah.
previously was the same time my pornography addiction began.
Wow.
Wow.
And I just hadn't ever really explored that connection
Wow.
and
Yeah.
understood where
Yeah.
those patterns came from. So I think
Wow.
just sitting down and
Yes.
charting out what are some of the big hard moments you've had to face, and then
Yeah.
also what are what also happened similarly around the same time, and how did those things form? Because the thing I want everyone to know is future you
Yep.
is an exaggerated version of current you. Time doesn't change you;
Interesting.
it makes you more of who you are, unless something
Wow.
changes.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness. I mean, I just want to say thank you for just this moment,
Yeah.
because it's so challenging. And I mean, a lot of us have been through difficult things we'd like to just leave behind.
Right.
And even just this moment, and I hope that we all can cling to this and know like this is a healing moment, I think, for some
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
Where some really hard things that you've been through don't have to dictate where you're going.
Yeah.
And that you have dominion and power over those things. And so
Yeah.
maybe this will be the day that some of us will rise up and take
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
100%.
This is a great time, great segue for our e-groups, book club, all of that. Dive in, because there's been
Yes.
so many principles. And I'm sure one of the things that I love about our e-groups is that we get to facilitate a space
Yeah.
where
Yes.
we can can ask some of those hard
right.
questions.
Right,
but I love, just
right.
like how we're doing now, that we're able to ask even a better question as we
Yes,
process and
absolutely.
steward our spouse. So what an incredible week.
Yeah.
It's gonna be good. And hey,
And
next
join a
week's-
team and serve, right?
First of all, yes,
Yeah.
love
half
week.
the thought,
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
week already.
Yeah.
Right,
And
that's right.
next week we have more questions. We have more chapters to go through. It's
Yep.
gonna be incredible.
Yep.
great.
So
Awesome.
we'll see you back here next week. But now you guys have fun discussing.